Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the Ear Research Foundation's Hearing Education Series. My name is Christina DeFrancisco, and I am the Director of Communications and Development for the Ear Research Foundation. Today, we are joined by Dr. Carl Bell, Chief Development Officer of Frequency Therapeutics. Before turning the webinar over to him, I want everybody to make sure that they stay on mute. If you have questions, please submit them in the chat and we can address them at the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Hello, everyone. As Christina said, I'm Carl Bell. I'm the Chief Development Officer for Frequency Therapeutics, and I appreciate the invitation from the Ear Research Foundation to talk with you today about some of the work that we're doing at Frequency. So with that, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay, hopefully you're seeing this title slide up. So the discussion today I've entitled Emerging Therapeutic Candidates to Treat Acquired Sensorineural Hearing Loss. And I'll share with you the approach that we take. Frequency considers itself a regenerative medicine company. And I'll talk about some of the subtle differences between the approach that we take in regenerative medicine versus those that others take. And you may have heard about some of the different approaches that some of the companies in the biotech space take. Before we get started, because Frequency is a public company, I have to put this slide up that says, today I might be making some forward-looking statements. And that means everything that I'll talk about today is factual, but I may say things where I might anticipate what could happen in the future with trials and so forth. It doesn't mean I'm making promises. It's just, again, these are forward-looking. There are certain things we might anticipate happening, but I can't predict the future. So as I mentioned, we take a unique approach to regenerative medicine. And what we try to do is treat with small molecule drugs to activate certain components within the body to do what they're designed to do. And many of these components, they may be considered stem cells. We call them progenitor cells. And these are the cells that are often responsible for making other functional cells that enable a particular function. And in the case of hearing, we know that over the course of a lifetime, one loses these functional cells, sensory hair cells. And we believe that we've identified a way where we can go into the cochlea, into the inner ear, deliver some of these small molecule drugs and activate those cells again to produce new sensory hair cells. And the hope is that if we're able to do that, then we can restore some function. Now, this approach is different than many others take. You may have heard of gene therapy. That's a case where you're actually delivering a gene. We're not altering the genetic landscape of an individual. We're not editing genes. There's a technology called CRISPR. We don't do any of that. We're simply treating cells that are already in the body and trying to encourage them by using small molecules to do what they were designed to do. So the hope here is that we potentially have been able to identify the first drug that may be able to restore hearing. And if that's the case, if we're able to do that, that would be pretty remarkable. And we know that that could be transformational in the field of medicine. And so I'll talk a little bit about the study that we're doing today, and we're doing work with the Ear Research Foundation on that. So the results of this trial, the next big set of data to tell us whether this drug can be effective in treating hearing loss, we will know the answer to that in the first quarter of next year. So sometime between January and March of next year, we'll be sharing results with the world, which are the results of the current trial that we're doing. So specifically the work that we're doing with the Ear Research Foundation, we've been doing many studies with Dr. Silverstein and his group. The first trial that we worked on, this would have been a couple of years ago, you'll see listed, it's the FX322-112 study. That was a study that we conducted in subjects that were diagnosed with age-related hearing loss. In this case, the study recruited individuals that were from 66 to 85 years old, and they could have no evidence, no medical history of any substantial noise exposure, no sudden hearing loss, no exposure to ototoxic drugs. Their hearing loss could only be as a result of aging. So that was one study that we did with the foundation. Another study, the next one down, the 113, FX322-113, that was in severe hearing loss patients. And so severe hearing loss is defined by the audiogram. And so this is about as severe as your hearing loss can be before you eventually get to profound loss. And so in this case, many of these individuals really have only one option left, and that would be to perhaps get a cochlear implant. So we were interested in studying how our drug FX322 could work in that setting as well. And then that brings us to the present day, which is the third study listed, what we call FX322-208. And that's a study that's being done in patients that have medical histories that are consistent with either having noise exposure, so they've lost their hearing from noise exposure. That might be recreational, it could be occupational, either one of those. Or they might have lost their hearing from what's called sudden sensorineural or idiopathic sudden sensorineural. Some individuals will wake up one day and they'll have lost their hearing in one ear typically. It usually occurs in one ear. So that's the study that's being conducted now. We have completed recruitment for that study. And as I said, that's the study where we'll be releasing the results in the first quarter of next year. So we're really excited about finding out about the results of that trial. That trial is a double-blind placebo-controlled study. So nobody knows who's received drug and who's received placebo. Only when we unblind the results next year will we know what the results are. So we're looking forward to that. And the partnership with the Ear Research Foundation and Dr. Silverstein's team has been a great partnership through the years. And I was working with Dr. Silverstein before I even came to Frequency. So we've had a good partnership over the years. And then at the end of the discussion today, I'll talk about the next study we're going to do. We'll be starting this study sometime towards the latter part of this year. And this is a new version. This is a second generation hearing restoration candidate. It's what we call FX345. So we're currently working on FX322. And then the next trial, the next new trial that will occur at the end of this year is FX345. And I'll talk a little bit about the differences between these two drug candidates. And that too will be in patients that have acquired their hearing loss. In the future, we hope to be doing more work, and that would be in the form of phase 3 trials. That's the final phase of testing pharmaceuticals or biotech agents that could potentially be therapeutics, right? So we have another phase to go. We're in phase 2. So here's what the company looks like, Frequency Therapeutics. We have a lead program, as I've described, which is FX322, and that's in a phase 2B, as we call it. And as I said, that the results of that study will be in the second quarter. In the middle of the slide is the second generation program, that's FX345. That study starts towards the latter part of this year. And then the results of that study will be available in the second half of next year. And then as I mentioned at the beginning, Frequency is not a hearing loss company, but we're a regenerative medicine company. And we have a program in multiple sclerosis as well. And I won't be talking about that today, but I just wanted you to be aware of it, that we're doing work outside the ear as well to regenerate certain functional tissues that we believe are important to help treat disease. Today, I'm going to focus really on hearing loss and the hypothesis about how we think our drug might work. So this cartoon here is trying to imagine yourself, now you're inside the inner ear. And I'll just orient you. These orange cells here with the stereocilia here, these are the sensory hair cells. These are outer hair cells, and over here are inner hair cells. And these purple cells right here are the progenitor cells. There's kind of supporting cells. You can see here that they help support the positioning of these sensory hair cells. But these cells are also the ones that are responsible for making new sensory hair cells, okay? And what we've tried to depict in this cartoon is that there are some cells that are missing. You can see this sort of blank space here. Some of these sensory cells are gone. And as we talked about, they die off, they disappear as a result of these exposures that we get over a lifetime, whether that be noise, could be a virus, could be ototoxic drugs. So here, what I'm showing you is this is FX322. FX322 is a combination of two small molecule drugs. Now we know these drugs can get into the cochlea. We've demonstrated that. We've shown that in some of our lab studies, and we've also shown that in humans. We've been able to measure that both drugs get into the inner ear, and this comes with following an intratympanic injection. So the concept here is that if these two drugs can gain access, they can activate these progenitor cells, these stem-like cells, and get them to form new sensory hair cells, with the hope that the formation of those new cells could restore function. Okay, that is the hypothesis about how we think the biology is working. Okay. Now let's just talk a little bit about getting drug to the ear. And I mentioned an intratympanic injection. This is something that Dr. Silverstein does a lot of. And here is a cartoon of a needle coming down the ear canal. Here's the eardrum right here. And when our material, our drug product, FX322, is injected into the middle ear space, it turns into a gel. And that gel gives the drug enough time to eventually diffuse from the middle ear, which is this space right here where the drug is sitting, into the inner ear, the cochlea right here. So the drug essentially diffuses right through a membrane into this space. This is where we need the drug to be, okay? Because this is where your hair cells are. Now, over on the right side, what we've tried to depict is where we think the drug goes. So the cochlea is shaped like a spiral, and in the base of the cochlea is where the highest frequencies are. So here you can see humans can hear up to 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. And from the orange shading here, what we estimate is that we believe that FX322 primarily gets into the cochlea and stays in the highest frequency range, okay? Maybe to about 10 kilohertz or so. We think that's pretty much how far it gets. It's difficult to get drug all the way through the cochlea, through all of the frequencies, okay? But this is important because when we start losing our hearing, we actually typically start losing our hearing in that highest frequency range first, because sound comes in here. Sound comes in through the high frequencies first. And if those cells over a lifetime are continually getting hit by sound, you can imagine that they start to wear out and they may die off. So we think getting drug into that high frequency range is quite helpful if we're trying to treat sensorineural hearing loss. So that's how we give the drug. And this is a procedure that takes, the injection itself takes about 10 seconds. And the drug, we believe, gets in almost immediately. Okay. So let me now show you a little bit of data. The way that we measure hearing function is usually by two ways. We do an audiogram, and we also do a number of measures of speech perception. And when I say speech perception, what I mean by that is we're presenting words. There's a recorded voice that essentially comes through a headset, and it says, say the word blank. And the patients that are undergoing the test procedure will simply say whatever word they believe that they heard. And we count the number of words correct. So we establish that at a baseline, and then we deliver either drug or placebo. And then we're looking to see, is a patient able to get more words correct over the course of the study? And that's something that we've seen in past studies. And I want to show you some of that data. And this would be from our very first trial. So here what I'm showing you are results from 5 subjects. Now the blue bar is the number of words that they scored correct, and it's out of 50. So at baseline, when subject number 1 started the trial, they got 14 words correct out of 50. So this is a test with a quiet background, just words coming in through the headset, and it's a recorded voice. The orange bar is the number of words that they got correct 90 days after administration. So you can see the subject 1 started at 14. After 90 days, they got 34 words correct. That's an improvement of 20 words. That's substantial. This doesn't happen randomly, okay? Typically, word recognition only gets worse over time. So all of these subjects were administered FX322, and you can just look at each of the additional subjects. Subject 2 started at 7, and then 90 days later got at least twice as many words correct. Subject 3 started at 20, and 90 days later landed at 39. Subject 4, 26, and they went to 47, and then subject 5 went from 29 to 38. So each of these subjects showed what we called, when we first saw this data, a signal. This is a signal of hearing improvement. Too early at this point for us to say that the drug is effective, but this was really exciting data for us. And because of it, we embarked on a multi-year program. And then subsequently, we did a number of other trials, and some of those I shared with you, we did with the Ear Research Foundation. So this table shows you that over the course of, this is about 5 to 6 years, we've conducted 5 clinical trials. This was the one I just showed you some of the data in, and we did 4 subsequent trials. These 2 here were trials that we did with Dr. Silverstein and his team. And any trial that's shaded in blue, this one, 201, 111, 112, and 113, each one of those trials showed a signal in hearing. And that means that in some patients in all of those trials, we're able to observe that they had improvements in their speech perception. And I want to clarify that when I say improvements, it means only patients treated with FX322 show these improvements. If patients were treated with placebo, no improvements were observed. And if patients were treated, if you looked at the other ear, because we only dose 1 ear, if you observe the untreated ear, you generally don't see any changes in that untreated ear. Okay, so this is an indication that the drug is doing something in multiple studies, which is a good sign. None of these studies were large enough, though, to really be able to conclusively say that there was a treatment effect. So you can see here's the number of subjects that were in the study, 23 in this one, 33, 30, and 31. We're essentially probing, looking at different patient populations to try to learn, where does the drug work? Where does it show a benefit? And what do those patients look like? What are the characteristics of the patients in which we've been able to see this hearing improvement signal? So now I want to show you individual data. You won't see the individual patients, but the way that we've set this up is I'm going to show you data from ears that have been treated with FX322, placebo-treated ears, and untreated ears. And that's shown in this slide. What we've done here is we've pooled 4 trials. Each of these trials was a single injection of FX322. And here is the change of words from baseline. And then it's oriented here with treated ears, FX322 treated, untreated ears, and then placebo ears over here. So I think what you can see immediately is that the orange circles, which are the treated ears, has a different looking distribution than the other ears. And so let me just walk you through how the chart is set up. So in general, a clinically meaningful change is usually 5 words. So if somebody from their baseline, which is 0, if they show a 5-word improvement on a 50-word test, then generally that's clinically meaningful. Something is happening. And conversely, if there's a 5-word deficit, if they go 5 words in the other direction, well, then something might be happening there as well. But I think what you can see here is there's a lot of ears that have exceeded well above this 5-word limit. And in fact, if you're inside the bracket here, that's considered by this test to be a statistically significant change from baseline for that particular ear or for that individual. So if you look in the untreated ear, you have 1 ear here that showed a change. And in the placebo group, you have 1 ear as well. And that's going to happen. Statistically, the test tells us that about 5% of the time, you'll have something that by random will happen. But clearly, you can see the number of patients treated with FX322. This is well beyond randomness. Okay? This means that there's something happening, and you can see the differences between the different groups. So this is really encouraging for us as we look across all of our trials. It's encouraging to pool the data and to see this pattern that something's happening when you treat an ear with FX322 and you measure the amount of drugs or the amount of words that they get correct after they've received treatment. So the next thing we did is we took all of this data and we said, what are the patients? What are the characteristics of the patients telling us? Where does the drug seem to be working? Right? And that's presented in this following slide. So let me set this up for you. Along the top here is severity of hearing loss. So this is derived by looking at their audiograms. And the value that you are able to derive from an audiogram, it's called a pure tone average. There are very strict criteria for what is mild, moderate, moderately severe, and severe. And then on this column here are what we call etiologies. It's either a noise exposure, a sudden hearing loss, or age-related. Okay? So when we pool all that data together, what you can see is there are certain categories where one sees percent of patients, if they landed within that category, 8% of them seem to be responding to treatment. Therefore, they're getting improvements in their speech perception. So let's just look at the categories where they landed. Well, in this case, we see that 33% of the moderate to moderately severe patients that had noise exposure are showing a pretty decent response. And over here, 40% of sudden hearing loss patients in that same severity category are showing a response. And then over here, you see moderate patients with sudden hearing loss. Okay, so these 3 categories show an abundance of patients that seem to be showing improvements in their speech perception after they've been delivered drug, and this would be 90 days later. Now, this isn't a precise way to determine what kinds of patients are able to show improvements, but it gave us a hint in a direction to take forward. So what we did then is these patients that land within this orange hashed circle, those are the patients that we've been recruiting for the current trial that we've been doing. And I'm going to talk about that trial now. That's the 208 trial. Now, does this mean that patients that are mild or patients in age-related hearing loss, does that mean that they're not going to respond? It doesn't mean that. It just means that to date, we've been focused mostly within this circle. We have the largest amount of patients within this circle. And this seems to be where the effect is being observed primarily. Okay, so we took this subset of patients, and that's who we have been recruiting for this next trial called the 208 trial. So let me describe now the trial. This is what I mentioned. We've completed enrollment for this trial recently. And this is a study that we're working with Dr. Silverstein's group, as well as there are 27 other centers in the United States that are participating on this study. So what we have been doing is recruiting. Our target was to recruit 124 subjects with either sudden hearing loss or noise-induced hearing loss. The age range is 18 to 65. And they had to have an audiogram that showed a pure tone average in the range of 35 to 85. So if they qualify by those criteria, then what happens? Well, they get into what we call a lead-in period, and that's these first 3 orange bars, if you will. So here's the first visit. They come in, they qualify, and then they go through a series of tests. And then 2 weeks later, they come back and they go through the same series of tests. And then yet again, another 2 weeks, they come back here and do the very same test. So they have to come back every 2 weeks for 3 consecutive visits and do the same tests. And what we're looking for is good consistency of test results from the patients. It's important that if you're comparing changes to baseline, it's really important that you have a solid, consistent baseline measure to compare against. So as long as the patients could come in and show good consistency, then they could get randomized to treatment. And so here is the randomization day. After they finish their testing here, they could get randomized to either FX322, 62 patients were targeted to get FX322, or they get randomized to placebo. And remember, nobody knows what they're getting randomized. Double-blind trial, we don't know. We're blinded. The sites don't know. The patients don't know. Right? So that's how these studies have to get run. Only when the study is complete and we analyze all the data will we then know who received what. Okay. So once they get randomized, then they go through a series of additional visits. And some of these patients, everybody has to complete 90 days. Some of them will continue to be monitored for longer periods of time. And here, what I've listed are a number of things that we look for in the study in order to make sure that we're comfortable that we're getting a good baseline measure. So sometimes if patients their values are changing significantly during this baseline period or this lead-in period, they won't be able to qualify to get randomized. Okay. For the most part, if you get into this first visit, in general, you're able to go through the entire study. Okay. The last thing I'll say is one of the things that we recognize when we do clinical trials is no patient wants to be the one that gets assigned to placebo. So what we have been sharing with the patients is if you do get assigned to the placebo group, when we're all done with this study, and again, assuming that we get positive results from the study, these patients here would be able to go to what we call an open label study, and they would then be able to receive an injection of FX322, right? So it's our way of appreciating the effort that they put forth, that they don't get any therapeutic benefit by being a placebo patient, but hopefully if the drug shows a benefit, then they can get access to drug in a subsequent open label study. Okay, so that's how we've essentially designed this. And as I said, there are 28 centers that are conducting this trial across the United States, and that your research foundation is one of them. Okay, I'm hearing somebody that came off mute. So if you can mute, that would be good. And we'll do questions when we're done at the end. Okay, so the study is what we call powered statistically. So what we're able to do is if there's a 20% difference between the FX322 group and the placebo group, that means the study has been successful. Okay, so that's why we have 124 subjects. It's able to detect a 20% difference between the two treatment groups. Now, let me switch programs now and talk about the second generation version of a hearing restoration therapeutic candidate. And the question that we posed, remember I talked about the fact that FX322 could only get really into the highest frequency range. But we asked the question, well, what if we could get drug further into the cochlea? What if we could get into lower frequencies and maybe start getting into the range, the speech region of the cochlea, which is a little bit south of 4,000 hertz. And so what we have been working on now is a new version of a drug called FX345. And this version of the drug has a different component in it. We've swapped out some of the components. And from this cartoon, you can see here, the purple shade is based on our lab work. This is what we estimate where we believe the drug can get. So you can see here, we think the drug can get maybe to 4 kilohertz and beyond. And that's when we're getting into the speech region of the cochlea, which can be really exciting to see. And the thinking is that maybe some of the patients that are not able to gain benefit from FX322, maybe since FX345 seems to get into the cochlea at lower frequencies, maybe FX345 can provide a benefit to a different population of patients. Okay? So that's the concept. And as I said, we're going to be starting a study with this new version here later in the year, and we're excited about that program as well. So the path forward that we're taking with our hearing restoration program, I mentioned in the first quarter of next year, we'll have a very important readout, or the results of the phase 2 study will be available. We've very clearly defined what success is. The endpoint, the primary endpoint, is a measure of speech perception. We've had regular interactions with FDA, and FDA and frequency are aligned on the fact that the primary endpoint is speech perception. And that in addition to that, we're bringing in the second generation version, FX345, and interested in determining whether that has additional benefit or a different benefit in certain sets of patients. And enrollment in that study starts at the end of this year. And then the results of that study would be available probably in the latter half of 2023. Okay. So what I've tried to do is give you an overview of the work we're doing at Frequency on our hearing restoration program, 2 drug products that we're moving forward with, a lot of work that we do with the Ear Research Foundation and Dr. Silverstein's team. That's been an important partnership for us over the years, and it's something that will continue. And with that, I'm happy to open it up and answer any questions.
Now, can you talk to him?
Mm-hmm.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can we talk to him?
Yeah, you can ask a question if you like.
Okay. So you want to talk about your hearing? Your
Uh,
hearing is profound.
Is he silent or is he talking?
No, he's talking.
Okay. I'm a former patient of Dr. Silverstein through Sarasota Hospital. And I've already had stapedotomy surgery in which the bones were replaced in my ears. Will I be a candidate for the cochlea for a possible testing for this FX345 in the fall of the year? I'm 74 years old.
Yeah, so I can, what I can say is currently we don't have any new trials that are recruiting, but the FX345 trial that I described, which is the next trial, the age range for that is going to be up to 67 years old. So you're a little bit beyond the age to qualify for that particular study. But I would say that in the future, we clearly are interested in continuing to do trials in subjects that are older than that age. And the hope at some point, and again, I think follow up with Dr. Silverstein would be important here. The hope would be at some point you'd be able to qualify for one of these trials.
Would I be a candidate for any of the other ones that are out there right now? The FX322, possibly
I think the age went up to 65 or
for
67.
severe to profound hearing loss.
Yeah, so the next study that we do with FX322, so we're doing the 208 trial right now. I don't know what the next trial looks like just yet. We have to see those results. We'll discuss them with FDA. And I think, as I said, we're interested in raising the age range. So it's possible that you could be a candidate for a future trial there as well.
Okay, because I've been studying frequency therapeutics now for
Long time.
years. And I've told Dr. Silverstein in the past, the last time I was in to see him, that I was waiting for this rather than going with a cochlear implant. And I'm really hoping that this comes on board sooner where I can get into a test program or something to try it.
So what do you have to do to get on a test program? We have to sign up? Do we have to make an appointment to go to Florida?
Yeah, usually the way that it works is anytime we start a clinical trial, all trials have to be posted on clinicaltrials.gov. And then usually what we do is we list the trial sites, and I would expect that we will continue to be working with the Sarasota site. And so when that study starts, I don't know when the next study will start at this point, but once it starts, then you would see plenty of advertising, and you could also contact Dr. Silverstein and his team to see whether or not you might be able to qualify.
Okay, so it's clinicalstudy.gov.
It's clinicaltrials.gov.
Clinicaltrials.gov.
Yeah.
We may have done that already.
Yeah,
So I'm 70. I have a moderate hearing loss, but I guess I didn't make that age group. I'm a little bit past that.
Is there any?
Can I jump
what
in?
do you-
Sorry, 1 second. If you wanted to sign up, you can go to our website and I will post that in the chat. And
Okay.
if you don't fit what's going on right now, I know that your information is kept. And if you fit any of the trials that the Ear Research Foundation's working on, you will be notified.
Okay.
I also have a question. This is Dr. Sherilyn Adler. I'm the executive director of an educational nonprofit that works to educate young people about noise-induced hearing loss and its prevention. And so I'm very grateful that you're doing this work. We are interested in your work from a personal point of view. We have a son who was born with a profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. He's now 27, but he received a cochlear implant at the age of 17 months. So he's had his cochlear implant for 25 years. But I'm curious to know 2 things. Do you hope eventually down the road that this type of treatment might be possible to use for children who are born with damaged cochlear hair cells in terms of regenerating them? And number 2, do you have any thoughts about perhaps using it prophylactically during cochlear implant surgery in order to preserve some of those hair cells from being damaged during the surgery itself?
Two really good questions. The first is that the drug currently is designed for adult onset acquired sensorineural, so not children that are born with hearing loss.
Okay.
Okay. However, we appreciate that there are children that are exposed to things. They may have normal hearing when they're born, but they can be exposed to things, viruses.
Sure, ototoxic drugs, those kinds of things, sure.
So at some point, we are interested in studying how the drug works in those types of individuals as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Very exciting work that you're showing with amazing preliminary results.
You're right, it's preliminary, and we're excited to get this next set of results. Your second question about prevention, it's not clear to us if the drug can work in a preventive manner. We've only been studying people that have established hearing loss.
Mm-hmm.
However, what might happen if you move the drug sooner towards whenever the event might be that occurs, right? And I suspect that at some point that might get studied down the road, but our approach, we believe the fastest way to get this drug approved is by studying the path that I outlined for you, which is primarily adult onset acquired hearing loss. And you can see we're focused mostly in the folks that have had noise exposure or sub. Once that drug can get on the market, hopefully it gets approved, and then it can be used and studied in a lot of these other settings.
Of course. Excellent. Really, really wonderful presentation. And thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Hello, I have a question.
Please.
Yeah, hi. My name is Matt Tykala. I'm from Texas here calling in. I have I've been off, the gentleman, 2 questions earlier mentioned he had surgery. I had similar surgery down here in Texas with Dr. Jackson, Lance Jackson, and it was done to try and help with my hyperacusis. I have severe hyperacusis and tinnitus in both ears, and that's what I'm seeking help in that. And I'm hoping that one of your trials shows some improvement. I don't know if you guys are tracking that or not. I just want to see if you would comment on if you've had any notification or seen any improvements with some of your clients who've gone through these studies who may have had severe tinnitus or hyperacusis, if they've seen any improvements as kind of an added benefit. I know you're focusing mostly on restoring hearing, but those of us who suffer from all 3 would like to see if there's any hope for the future for the ones that are the most debilitating is tinnitus and hyperacusis. I'll drop off and let you answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. It's a really important question too, and we appreciate the fact that we're only studying hearing loss. We know that there are other things that come along often with the hearing loss. In the case, well, firstly, I know Dr. Jackson. He's great. I've worked with him in the past, so you have a great physician there. And with respect to hyperacusis, it's not something that we study in the trials. But I know Dr. Silverstein and I talked a lot about hyperacusis, what it means. And I think that maybe someday there could be a therapeutic if one understands a little bit more about that pathology, if you will. The question around tinnitus is a really important one. I would say maybe 60% of the patients that are in our trials, remember when we recruit them, we're looking primarily for a certain kind of hearing loss, but oftentimes they report tinnitus as well. And so we have a measure of tinnitus in our trials. It's called the Tinnitus Functional Index, 25-question questionnaire that they do at the start of the study, and then they complete it at the end of the study. Now, I haven't seen the data, obviously. We won't see that until next year. But I can tell you that in the past, anecdotally, and this is just anecdotal from some of the physicians that we've worked with that have been on some of our trials, that the patients have said to them, some patients have said to them, if they had hearing improvements, their tinnitus was also not as bad as it was when they started. That's really exciting to hear. And one could imagine that if one could improve hearing and bring back some of the functions such as filtering sound, that maybe tinnitus could improve as well. I don't know whether this trial that we're going to be looking at the results of next year, I don't know if we'll be able to see that in this trial because it's not really designed for that. But if there is any kind of signal that we might see, then I could imagine down the road that we could be interested in doing a study where you're recruiting patients that have hearing loss and tinnitus. And then you would want to understand what sort of tinnitus that they have. And then perhaps doing a trial in that sort of setting might be the way to begin to uncover whether there's any benefit that could be provided to that as well. So that's sort of where we are. I think it's a big question mark. We recognize it's a big problem, and we talk to lots of patients that share with us some of their challenges. We'll cross our fingers and hope that there might be some benefit there as well.
Well, thank you very much. I'm back on. I just want to thank you for that, for your company's willingness to think outside the box. And I would add that those of us who suffer from hyperacusis, that's the real monster. Tinnitus you can live with. You can learn how to deal with it psychologically, but the hyperacusis is the monster you cannot avoid. It dominates your life. And if there's anything you guys would pick up anecdotally, your studies showing hyperacusis being reduced, that would be huge. There are many people who would benefit from that because it's, again, you cannot escape it, and it ruins lives. It really does. So thank you, and God bless you, and just Godspeed on your trials.
We appreciate it. We're working as hard and as quickly as we can on this.
There is one more question in the chat. Can you see that or just me?
Like, is it from, okay, so if you have profound single-sided sensorineural hearing loss and your semicircular canals were destroyed, stop vertigo due to Meniere's, would this drug be? So it's a good question. For the studies that we've been doing today, in general, patients that have the kinds of drugs that are used to treat the vertigo, we generally exclude those patients. But as we talked about, the hope is that if we can get this drug approved at some point, and we've been estimating that if we can get it approved, it might be approved in the, let's say, the mid 2020s. I can't say a specific year, but sometime in the mid 2020s. Once that drug is out there, then more than likely it's going to be studied in a number of different settings. And the one that this individual is describing, that could be one that you know, could be investigated. So right now, all I can say is we generally exclude patients that have that sort of a history.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, hello. I have a question.
Please.
How you doing? Good afternoon. My name is Renato Mota. I'm a fire lieutenant with the City of Miami Fire Rescue. I've been in the department for 17 years now, and I've been dealing with medicine and a little bit of recruitment as well. Now, I've been going for people, so I saw Dr. Joshua Light at his practice. I saw Dr. Groteman at the Baptist Health practice, and they've done multiple different treatments, multiple different approaches. Even a surgery was done, injections. So I'm assuming, according to your last answer, that would automatically exclude me from any potential research due to all the extensive treatments that I have done. Now, I do have initially started out on my left ear. Some of my coworkers do have the same experience, and we just automatically assume it's because we drive the truck. As a driver, you have more access to the left side for the loud horns and sirens and all that. So question is, even though, how long would you say, is it like, am I permanently excluded from any future research because at one point I had all these treatments, or is there like a range in which if I've been without any treatment for so many years, then I would qualify for any research?
It's again an important question. Some of what you were saying at the beginning I didn't quite hear, but I think I can answer the question for you. You know, it was fascinating to hear you describe some of the epidemiology that in first responders, the ear that may be closer to the noise could be more severely affected versus the contralateral or the opposite ear. So remember, we have two ears, and oftentimes your ears are giving different responses. Again, it's difficult for me to say for future trials how those would be designed, but I think our hope is that if FX322 can be approved and the drug can be out there and be used to be tried in a number of different investigations to see can it provide benefit. In addition, if FX345, if we can advance that rapidly, as I talked with you, it gets, we believe, more broadly throughout the cochlea. And that might have advantages that we currently don't understand because we haven't tested it yet. I think there's hope, right? And I think that we want to be able to get these drugs available to as many people as we can to see if we can provide whatever benefit possible. And we can't do this. We don't do this by ourselves. We do it, as I've talked about, through partnership with Dr. Silverstein and his team. I've worked with Dr. Light in the past, who is a great physician. And in partnership with the sites, in partnership with the staff at all the sites, but most importantly, it's partnership with the patients that volunteer for our studies. And if they can't get benefit from being in our studies, they're certainly helping us understand what sort of benefit we can provide to others. So I think ultimately that would be our goal. So it's, again, hard for me to predict the future. I don't want to say you can never be considered a candidate. That wouldn't be the right thing for me to do, because study designs change all the time. And as you learn about a therapeutic and you learn about the things that it might be able to do, it's possible at some point that you might be able to benefit from some of these treatments and others that are on the horizon as well.
Okay, and would it be all the trials are posted in that that site that you said, I believe it was clinicaltrials.gov?
Yep, if you go to clinicaltrials.gov, and if you can do this a couple of different ways, you can search for FX322. If you just enter FX322, there's a search bar there. You'll see any site or any study that pulls up that's currently recruiting, and we usually list the sites as well. But as I said, there's no studies that are recruiting at this stage. The FX345 study will start recruiting later on this year, and Sarasota is one of our sites.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate everything you guys are doing.
Yeah, my pleasure, and great questions, and best of luck to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
If there's any other questions, you can unmute yourself. If not, thank you everyone for joining, and please join us next month. Dr. Silverstein will be presenting on hyperacusis. So you can go to our website and you can register for that.
Good timing.
It is perfect timing. All right, well, thank you everyone. And thank you to Dr. Carla Bell. And I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. I enjoyed it.